I just wanted to remind everybody that we have another show coming up on Tuesday. It's going to be very interesting. It's going to be with three chief executives of animal humane societies in Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina. Very interesting topic, and I hope you can join us. But for today, let's get on with talking about hunger in America. So, welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we'll talk about the issue of food waste and food security in America with special guests. Shelley, President and CEO of FarmShare Incorporated in Florida, and Rick Nahmias, founder and CEO of Food Forward in Los Angeles, California. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show. We'll announce results. And questions submitted to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you so much for coming. It's great to have the great state of Florida and the great state of California represented here on the show. But one of the things that we are going to talk about are the problems that we all have in common. So up to 40% of food that is produced in the US goes to waste, while so many families go daily without food. So let's dive into a discussion of food waste and preventing food waste, and how do we make sure that Americans are fed. And let's start with you, Stephen, if you don't mind. I looked up Florida's agricultural sector. It basically ranks 18th in the nation. California ranks number 1. We really have no excuse for hunger in this country. How do you see this issue unfolding in your neck of the woods?
So you're right. So Florida is a huge producer, especially in the winter. We're kind of considered the America's breadbasket. We have a lot of specialty crop producers: corn, squash, zucchini, beans, all those things that people love on their tables during Thanksgiving and New Year's. And it's a shame that, 40% of that food is going to waste. And so FarmShare, 1991, we were formed about 30 years ago. And this unique concept that this food was going to waste, how could we capture that, ultimately grab it and use it to feed people for free of charge? And that was what the foundation of FarmShare was when this was created by our founder some 30 years ago. And we've since then developed great relationships with our local farmers. We've been able to capture those foods that are currently being underutilized, and use that to feed the entire state of Florida. Last year, it was almost 51 million pounds of just fresh fruits and vegetables alone that we were able to save and keep from being wasted.
It's interesting because there's also an element that previously was preponderant, this idea that somehow that if food is given away instead of thrown away, that somehow you would erode the whole supply chain. You would erode the price that farmers received, you would erode the price that retailers received, and so on. But Rick, it looks to me like the problem of hunger is so endemic here in the United States that none of that is true, right? I mean, you can basically figure out a way to have the supply chain, the commercial side thrive, but in a complementary way to the philanthropic side, right?
Yeah, I think, just going back to what you were talking about at the top of the show, COVID has laid bare certain inequities that were just bubbling under the surface that we cannot deny anymore, as far as who gets to eat healthy food, who has parity with health, and who has access to medicines and hospitals and such. Food to me is medicine. Food is life. And it's one of those things where when you look at the economics from almost any angle, just let's say the overproduction of fresh produce that is been part of the industry because of need, because of the land we have, because of the cost benefit in it. You see that 40 to 50% of what is grown is basically grown as an insurance policy. And at the end of a year, when you don't have a hurricane or you don't have some kind of catastrophe, you have a massive amount of surplus. And I think that what we need and what we're, starting to see, knock wood, with this new administration is a new step into what can we do as a nation to look at what we're creating and share this abundance in places of scarcity.
The thing that I think is also really interesting is that if you look at growing to surplus that is then discarded, look at the supply chain costs of that, right? If you have 40% of the product that is basically being discarded. Basically, you're discarding 40% of the fertilizer. You're discarding 40% of the seed. You're discarding the 40% of the land that is under cultivation. You're discarding 40% of the roads that are being used in order to transport those goods. In a sense, we are paying for a huge amount of stuff that we just then throw into the garbage, while on the other hand, we have people who are going hungry. How do we, well, instead of going to the top line, to this sort of overarching picture, Stephen, talk about how you're organized, the logistics of what you're doing, how you collect food, and how you distribute it.
Sure. So that's one of the key things. The idea, the concept of trying to capture this food is an easy one. It's innovative, but it sounds simple. But in reality, it's very, very complex, because you can try to capture all the food you want, but it's a perishable food product. And by the time it gets to you, a lot of times the way the farmers are making donations, because first they're trying to move this product on the open market. If the price doesn't support that, now they're reaching out to food banks like us to say, can you take it so that I don't have to dump it? By that point in time, you're 10 days, 12 days into the cycle of that. So you've got to get that food, you've got to get it into your warehouse, and you got to turn it around within 24 to 48 hours and get it into an agency or a recipient's hands to make sure they can then eat it and consume it, so that it's put to good use. And
you're making a great point, right? Even before you get it into your warehouse, you've got to pre-plan, and the farmer has to pre-plan, because they know when they put that seed in the ground that a certain amount of that product is likely to not end up going to commerce. So you have to have a very sophisticated front-end planning system in addition to that very sophisticated logistics system, don't you?
You do, yeah. And you have to develop that relationship, because ultimately the farmer wants to sell every piece of produce that he grows or she grows. And so they're never really looking to donate, although I think they should. That's part of this conversation, is I think that the farmer should build in some of that access, knowing that they're likely going to have to make this donation. And they do have relationships with food banks like us. They make a phone call right away. We have a fleet of trucks that we send to them. We pick up that food and we bring it back to our warehouse to then push it through our supply chain as a food bank. But it does take planning. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
And Rick, could you describe a little bit about how your organization functions? Because you also have this whole gleaning operation, which I thought was really fascinating.
We started, as just about the largest urban gleaning organization in the country. Food Forward started in a backyard, just about a quarter mile from where I am now. It was an idea of seeing food lines at pantries during the recession in 2009, just mushroom, and seeing all this fruit from people's home fruit trees going to waste, and connecting the two and being a bridge with volunteers. And so we started with backyards and urban orchards. We added farmers markets. And then the big one was the wholesale market, which is the largest by volume in the United States, here in Los Angeles. And it's a very simple thing. It's about taking stuff that is surplus and getting it to places of need. We've been very, very clear from the beginning that we act as that bridge. We do a little bit of public outreach, but most of it is a B2B operation. But as Stephen said, it is a really intense logistics operation, because before we even touch the food, it's on its way to decay. And we're dealing with a very perishable product, which, even our wholesale drivers are not just drivers. They're actually skilled procurement experts who actually go in and inspect the produce to make sure it's not at a certain point of decay, that by the time it actually gets through our system, it's of no use to anybody. And so sticking with, the produce, we don't deal with shelf-stable products of any kind, because of what we feel is a big gap in need around, food security, which is fresh fruits and vegetables and plant-based diets. It has added definitely dollars and, sweat and blood to our operations. But at the end of the day, when you get that chain moving and you really come to understand what's at stake, but also the relationships that you can build with the farmers, with the wholesalers, it's a pretty amazing thing. And if you flash back a year, when the food system was really buckling across the country, and organizations like ours and Stevens were available to actually step in so that less and less of that produce was thrown out, it actually was an odd silver lining, because it created opportunities which now we can actually expand on as far as partnerships with growers, packers, shippers, all across the region.
I also think it's really interesting, your point about squeezing time out of the process, because you don't really have any time if you're dealing with fresh. And Stephen, are you also primarily focused on fresh as opposed to shelf stable products, the packaged goods that really don't deteriorate that often?
Farm Share does both. So we were founded on the fresh fruits and vegetables, and that was primarily what we did for probably the first 10, 15 years or so of our existence. But over the last 10 or 12 years, we've expanded. So last year we did 135 million pounds of food. Of that, like I said, 50 million was fresh fruits and vegetables. So you have a substantial amount of our food products that is also shelf stable, proteins, canned goods, milk, dairy, things of that nature, so that people can have a full, well-rounded meal. But our specialty still, and what we do best, is fresh fruits and vegetables.
Now, we talked about putting together staff. You've got people who are doing modeling and planning, financial planning, and so on and so forth. You have people who are basically procurers that would be called buyers under another circumstance, but they're procuring, and they're also ensuring that if you are committing those 30 trucks or your entire logistics chain, that you actually have enough time to get that product to market and it's going to be in good enough condition, right? Then you have a group of people who, when they accept the fresh products in particular, that they're reviewing those products, because not all those products are going to arrive in sufficient conditions, right? Then you have the logistics operation, the truck drivers and all that. You have systems. I mean, this is a very, very sophisticated operation. In terms of staff stability, retention, the mix between permanent staff and volunteers, how do you manage that, Stephen?
You know, it's tough as a not-for-profit. You know, our funding is volatile, and so it goes up and down from year to year. And so you try to maintain at least a basic level of service that allows you to maintain and distribute as much food as possible year in, year out. Volunteers is a great way to supplement your staffing. It allows you to bring in people who you don't have to pay, you don't have health benefits for, you don't, but are willing to give it to their time and help you move that food product. And so they become a big part of the overall plan. But ultimately, you usually have to rely on your staff. That's the way you're going to get most of your product moved and acquired and done right. And the key is to find those that are mission oriented. At least that's what we found. You know, you want staff members that love what they're doing, that they're there for the mission, not for the money. And ultimately, they put in long, hard hours, but they smile at the end because they've made a difference in the world. They've made a difference for their fellow man or woman. And we found that's been a very successful model in helping us to be successful as an organization.
And Rick, how do you build your team? And also, every time you have a volunteer, you have to have somebody who trains the volunteer, who manages the volunteer, right?
Yeah, we started, I mean, I was the very first volunteer as the founder and CEO. I was the first person picking tangerines back in 2009. But we've now, on a good year, moved to using between 4,000 and 5,000 unique volunteers doing our work. Now, granted, most of those are in the backyard fruit tree gleaning program, as well as the farmers market recovery. Those are all volunteer-led programs. But we've also had volunteers that migrate into staff. And I think there's something that we also look at as our board of directors are the super volunteers. You know, those are people that give dozens and dozens of hours a month to keep the organization running, to help with fundraising and governance and that sort. But our staff is unique. We've had mostly folks coming in from outside food recovery because it is a relatively new field. I was a photographer. I had no background in nonprofit before I started this. And my COO came from charter schools. My CDO came out of advocacy and stuff happening in Washington. But what we've learned is food is a wonderful foundation. It's something that those of us who are privileged enough get to embark on 3 times a day. It's a great way to build community. And so we have found that, it's really about creativity, stamina, intrepidness, and innovation coming into the organization. And we embrace individuals in various roles from junior all the way up to senior leadership. As long as they come in with that love of the mission and understanding that both, food security and food waste is what we're about.
Well, Dr. Samuel Carter actually mentioned in a comment, he said outreach is key and finding the right gatekeepers and stakeholders is really important. And what you're saying is really food binds us all together, right? If you're a Democrat, you eat food. If you're a Republican, you eat food. If you're an independent, you eat food. It doesn't matter who you are, what your beliefs are, right? You can always identify with the fact that hunger and your child's hunger is something that needs to be addressed right away. And it doesn't matter if you're a photographer or if you're an advocate or if you're a business person, you've got to eat, right?
Absolutely. I would also say that I've come to look at hunger as not a supply problem, but a distribution problem.
Mhm.
And I think we have, in the last decades of creating your Amazons and your FedExes and your mega UPSs, that we have the means and the technology to solve these issues if we have the empathy and the will to do it.
There's
So
also
it's
a perception issue. We just finished a poll in which we asked, do you stay away from buying bruised fruit and veggies at the grocery store? And 74% of people said yes, they stay away from that. So that right there is a source of waste, right? In the commercial sense, the farmer who is trying to sell their product at the highest possible commercial price is going to know that downstream that whoever the buyer is also going to be discarding some things, let alone the fact that not all the farmer's product is going to be purchased at the point of sale. So there is a definite supply, and that goes to your point, Rick, that this is a distribution problem. The supply is there. It's connecting the dots between people in need and people who have, right?
correct. It really is definitely finding that. We work with over 350 unique agencies across 8 counties, 7 states, and even tribal regions. And it's about finding partnerships where we can bring to the table, the produce, and they can get it that last mile. And I think it is understanding, again, that passing a baton in a really professional, time-sensitive way. And so much is possible once you find those partnerships instead of trying to do all that work yourself.
Rick, do you also help urban gardeners, since you're a gleaning operation? Do you help urban gardeners and urban growers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we started, the call out was to urban gardeners that had an abundance. We find that most fruit tree owners, and again, I'm sure Stephen sees this in Florida too, with very optimistic orange trees, they maybe use 10% for their own personal needs. That means 90% hangs on that tree for birds, squirrels, rodents, whatever. It's ridiculous. As you said, there's all these things that are wasted in the supply chain to get there. We have started finding ways to actually embrace the home gardener even more and started this program called Fruit Share, which runs twice a year in the winter during citrus season and the summer during vegetable and tomato season, where basically it becomes this giant free bazaar where people put themselves on a giant map. They either come to take produce or leave produce or anything in between. And it's a great community builder. And it really, you find all these home gardeners are, really beaming with being able to share what they've grown. And I think in this last year, as we've all seen, home gardening has really taken off while we've been locked down. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that continues to grow. There is something so amazing. I mean, I will do this after this program. I will go to my front yard. I will pick some strawberries and they'll go in my yogurt today. I mean, it's a real privilege to be able to do this, but that also brings a great deal of pride when you start growing your own food and understanding you can actually really mitigate a lot of the waste by doing that. I think you also come to appreciate that weirdly shaped strawberry more than you might in the supermarket and pass it up. You may just say, you know what? I'm going to eat this anyway, because it's about aesthetics. And I think we as a society right now are very overly hung up on aesthetics.
We just got a comment, as a matter of fact, from one of our attendees who said exactly that he sometimes catches himself in what they purchase because aesthetics does play a role. But if you do this a little bit more mindfully, right, Stephen, you kind of can catch yourself and you can say, wait a second, I could actually have a different experience if I think about this a little bit differently. And frankly, there are some fruits where that sort of difference in texture from the natural growth and perhaps a little bit of a bruised kind of thing. A peach, let me tell you, bruised peach is sometimes the most delicious thing on this planet, right?
Right. And a lot of it's education related, because you talk about the buyer drives the market. And so the farmer can't sell the short squash or the bruised squash or the misshapen product because ultimately the grocery store doesn't think the buyer is going to buy it. But through an education campaign, which, these ugly fruit things that you're talking about, that's kind of the movement that's going on, that starts to change that market. People start to realize and understand that this is perfectly healthy, edible, nutritious, and great tasting fruits and vegetables and produce. And they're willing to buy that. And once they're willing to buy that, the grocery stores are willing to stock it. The farmer can sell it, and it starts to reduce the waste overall. And so it really is a marketing and education campaign that we need to embark on, which I think is happening and has been happening over the last couple of years. And things have been improving, but ultimately you've got to drive it from the top down.
So we just finished a poll where we asked people whether they know what the imperfect produce movement is. And if so, have you changed how you buy your produce? And 48% said yes, but 28% said they'd never heard of the imperfect produce movement. So you've heard about it now, right? So we can actually change our habits.
I think there's also a higher level issue here about eating with intention, knowing where your food comes from, being open to different types of foods, but also the quantity in which we consume. I've got nothing against Costco, but I think there is this kind of mentality often that you have to buy something in a bigger quantity to make it valuable. And when it comes to fresh produce, we've learned that means half a box of strawberries can go to waste. I think the Ad Council did a really neat ad campaign a couple of years ago where you watch this strawberry go from seed to field to packing to someone's home, only to get there, have 3 or 4 strawberries eaten, and then have the rest of the container thrown out. And I think as we as individuals, people often ask, well, what can I do as a person around this issue? What you can do immediately is the next time you go shopping or go to the farmer's market, think of what you will eat in that next few days or in that week and buy just that. Don't constantly, because it's on sale, buy, 18 pounds of grapes or this or that. I think there is a very clear way in which people can start to understand using what they need on this planet rather than just going gangbusters because it's cheap. There is a cost to all of it, even the cheap stuff.
You don't have to overbuy.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on that to say the same, that once you get out of the farm fields and you get whatever has actually been put into production for consumption, the largest amount of food waste is coming from household food waste. 43% is actually being wasted just for that very reason that Rick mentioned, that you're overbuying, that you're not actually preparing it, that you're not planning ahead. You go to the grocery store, you just buy everything because you're hungry, and then you're never preparing it, and it goes into the trash. And you end up with 22% of the product going into a landfill. I mean, most of the product in a landfill is actually food waste.
That's fascinating. Most of the product in a landfill is food waste?
The largest percentage, 22% is food waste. Everything else makes up, different varieties. But as far as a bulk amount, it's food waste.
Rick,
one of the highest, I think it's the number 3 issue of dealing with climate change is actually reducing food waste. If we can cut down food waste across the planet, it would make a huge difference in moving the needle.
That is just amazing. I want to pick up on a point that you both made, and that is, if you look at this whole chain of value, and there was some reference previously to what Amazon has done in terms of logistics and some of the clarity that came to you through this COVID situation, that we really do have not a supply problem, but a distribution problem. To what extent are you able to leverage technology to create these connections, either through mobile apps, through instant communication that is taking place, even the use of text messaging? I've got something you can pick up today, right? That sort of instantaneous aspect of what we all have with our mobile devices today. How do you leverage that, or are you able to leverage it, because you are a modest nonprofit? You don't have a lot of budget to put into technology like Amazon does, for example.
We are scrappy, but we use it all, to be honest. We start text messages, but phones, emails. We use very, very professionalized software that we've taken the plunge and spent the money on because it makes both the procurement and the inventory that much easier. We work on the same level that Stephen's organization does. We did 62 million pounds of recovery and distribution last year. And for us, we have to do an audit for every pound of food. So it's very worthwhile at the end of the day using professionalized systems to know what's come in and what's gone out. But we have built, a whole bunch of different pipelines. But I'll be really honest, Mark, at the end of the day, it's relationships. Who are you texting on the other end of that phone? Who are you speaking to and who's reaching out to you? And do they feel that you are the right entity to move that food and be able to get at that into the hands of folks that need? And if you prove, as I think Food Forward has, that you're the right organization to do that in the region you're in, those relationships tend to breed more relationships. And I think in the end of the day, ironically, the farmers are very, they're embracing technology for growing, but when it comes to communication, most farmers we know, that's not their strongest suit. And so often it'll take quite a bit of communication to get there. But bottom line is you use whatever tools you got.
Well, it's not transactional is what you're saying, right? I mean, that's the thing about in particular, farming as a business. It's not transactional. There's a lot that's not under your control, and relationships and trust and those kinds of person-to-person kind of things will never be replaced, ever. But being able to make appropriate use of technology is great because it saves time. Stephen, are you recognizing in Rick's description some of how you operate?
Yeah, we do. I mean, so as far as the communication, we try to use as much technology as we can, whether it be through social media platforms, whether it be through text messaging campaigns, whether it be through inventory databases so we can track it coming in and coming out. All of that has been helpful. But at the end of the day, where the backlog usually comes for us at Fresh Fruits and Vegetables side is refrigeration and transportation. And so during the COVID, especially right around March, April, we had a lot of our farmers that could no longer move their product to the cruise ships or the restaurants. And so they got backlogged, and we did the best we could to capture as much of that we could as in such a short window of time. And ultimately where we found the backlog was we either needed more trucks so that we could move it in and move it out much faster and deliver it, or we needed more refrigeration so that once we got it into our warehouse, we could store it longer in order for it to get it through the supply chain and supply system. And so those were the two areas where we found we needed the most investment because there's not a lot of refrigerated space that's available for this type of use. And with those two things, you can solve a lot of the others. But yes, technology works very well on the back end and on the front end, but in the middle is where most of the backlog occurs.
We just completed another poll, and we talked a little bit about selecting food. It's not necessarily buying food, but how do people see their own decision criteria? And it's interesting. 25% each said I select fresh and requiring preparation over packaged and convenient. That there was also 25% selecting based on taste, right? But only 4% said that they would select package and convenient over fresh. So there's definitely a tilt toward fresh, and the other questions are pretty much evenly distributed. Buying locally, buying the food that is least expensive, buying food that looks best. They all received fairly similar numbers. So what we're seeing is a range of human responses to food, but taste and fresh seem to be the preponderant trends. So it seems that some of these messages are getting across.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things we find, like when we have our food distributions and is what to do with the fresh produce, because there's a lot of produce out there that people just don't know how to cook. They don't know how to prepare it. They don't know how to eat it. They've never had it. We noticed this especially in Florida, where North Florida is a different demographic than South Florida, and what they eat and what they're used to from a fresh fruits and vegetables standpoint is completely different. And if we provide a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables that people in South Florida are used to eating to North Florida, the people in North Florida have no idea what to do with it. And
so it's cultural competencies as well is really important. So the whole idea of what you're supplying, right? And if you're going to teach prep, you have to teach prep that is appropriate to the people who are coming to you to help, right?
Absolutely.
Right. To help move the product.
That's something that came into Food Forward very early, where we have a very large Hispanic community in Los Angeles. It's a majority of the city, actually. And a number of the agencies that we serve predominantly supply produce to Hispanic neighborhoods and communities. And so understanding if we're going to have this surplus of bok choy and we want to share it with them, we need to supply recipes that are going to give these communities an insight into how bok choy might relate to another green that they're used to. The same thing with Black communities as well. So making sure that you're distributing produce of a type to individuals that can use it is super important, because otherwise it just gets wasted on the other end of the supply chain.
And that means that your staff have to be sensitive, they have to be knowledgeable, the farmers that are connected to you have to be knowledgeable, and you have to be listening to your consumers as well and feeding that intelligence back. So there's a whole feedback loop, right?
Absolutely.
So we're coming to the end of our time. So Steve, I'm going to give you a word, and then Rick, you're going to take us out. If we could change one thing about America's food system, and you both have such deep experience, but such similar experience. I find this all across the country. It doesn't matter if we're talking about, St. Louis, Missouri, or, Seattle, Washington, or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Everybody is talking in the same language. If you could change one thing, Stephen, what would we change in the United States about our situation regarding the availability of food to everyone?
I don't know that there is one thing. I think there's a bunch of issues that we talked about, a lot of them. But ultimately it is, I think, making the issue important. You've got to make this a priority. And I think that's the number one thing, is that this has not necessarily been the top priority that it should have been, both from a farmer's perspective and from a government perspective. And hopefully we're changing that. And hopefully COVID brought to attention to people that it's not one demographic or one type of people that may be hungry at all times, but that hunger can affect anybody. It can affect your neighbor. It can affect your son's teacher. It can affect the local, football coach. People, your friends, relatives, and neighbors can be affected by hunger overnight and unexpectedly. And this is an important issue that needs to be addressed. Food insecurity needs to be addressed. And I think that's probably the number one thing, because where there's a will, there's a way.
Awareness, prioritization. Rick, what is your answer to this?
Yeah, I believe that, we need to look at this not just as, a food bank as a dumping ground for mac and cheese and granola bars, but that we have a population that is stably food insecure. And there's a whole bunch of underlying issues that tie into that. And while we work on hopefully dismantling some of those issues and addressing them, we need to make sure that people are eating with dignity, that they're eating healthily, and that food, again, acts as medicine. It acts as a conduit to good health and happier lives. And they're not just being given what doesn't sell on the grocery shelves. We have this amazingly wealthy country and this amazing abundance of produce, which to me is just a metaphor for life. We need to share it. We need to give it. We need to make sure everyone has access to it.
Such important points. I would urge everybody to go to the internet and call up under images, under Google, call up images of the Great Depression. And then think, you can walk out with your cell phone, with your camera, walk your streets, and you can take those same pictures today, right? That is an amazing fact, right? You can see the same food lines. You can see the same people lying on the streets and sleeping because that's the only place they can really find to bed down for the night. So that's something that we can deal with. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about dealing with food insecurity in a land of abundance, and it's in our power. We just have to act as you are acting. Thank you so much for your service to your communities. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you all attendees for coming and being part of this show. And we look forward to our discussion on Thursday. And really, please thank your staffs and your boards for us, Stephen and Rick.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having us.
Have a great day.